co-parents and co-teachers. So what I'm going to do is break up this video. There's two parts to it. The first part is going to be a spoiler-free, just basic analysis of the movie. You have an idea of what you're getting into when you go see it with your student and child. So a few things basic to the film. One is the story. It's more of a political intrigue, especially in part two. There's more scenes being cut through different planets, and you get to see the characters unraveling as all the pieces are finally coming together from part one. It's quite artistically done. There's a lot of story packed into a lot of the scenes, so the background, the images, all of that really plays into influences from the book because the book is very dialogue heavy, so it can't have all of the dialogue in it. Sound is amazing. Hans Zimmer does a really big job. There's a lot of emotion coming through. So that's something to think about if you're maybe thinking about IMAX. If you want the full audio experience, just be warned that there's been cases of people when the sound really hits, they move in the theater. So it can be really great on the emotion, but also be maybe too impactful. Scope and visuals. I think the biggest part about this film is the scope. There is so much about how big and small things appear. The humans can feel really close up at times, but then other times there's these ginormous sandworms, just colossal figures and spaceships and things at times. So I think the scope really plays into how big the story feels for the characters and the impact upon their world. As far as acting goes, I think it's really good. It's quite solid with all the characters. Um, Chani is a little different than she is in the book. In this, she really represents the voice that the audience is supposed to have, that they're against this movement of Paul Atreides becoming their messiah because it'll lead to some great war in the future. She's trying to prevent that. So her arc is not really completed in this film, and I assume that in the third part, or Dune Messiah, whatever they call it, that she'll get her completion there. Also, Christopher Walken is in it, so Christopher Walken has his pauses at moments in the film. It's fine. He doesn't have a lot of scenes. I don't think he was necessarily the top choice, but the Emperor is more of his impact as a character rather than the impact it has on the actor in the story. So I think he does all right. Basic themes to look for. Overall, this is a book by someone who was really concerned about environmentalism, ecology, and then there's a heavy set of politics and religion and how interconnected those two concepts are. And his big thing that really motivated him was charismatic leaders and the negative effects it could have. He's someone who's coming from World War II when he was younger, and then Vietnam when he got older, and religion gets thrown into the mix of charismatic leaders and how that affects people. Also, there's a strong theme of the self, and I'll go into that a little bit more in detail. But one thing to look for if you just want a simple what should I dialogue and talk to my student or child about from the film? I would talk about water. The use of water is rather important. There's several key scenes of dialogue. They could have used a different word, but they purposely chose water to help facilitate that ongoing theme. There's especially a play of the water of life. It's very important to the transformation of the characters to Paul Atreides and completing his arc as a protagonist in the film. Another thing worth noting is that one of the characters, Thufir, is missing from the film. He's not dead. You don't know what happens to him in part one, and I've read that he was cut from the film. They have a lot of focus of the Bene Gesserit, and he didn't make it into the second part. So hopefully he gets to come back in the third part. I thought the acting was cool, and I do like him as a character. I think it's important to see that level of intellectualism that he brings because that is how the characters are solving their problems. They're trying to compute their way through issues. So he brings that. Finally, the big thing is IMAX. You should know that originally the film was uh, shown in IMAX. It was filmed that way. So that is the highest quality of picture and sound possible. But I checked online, that's $25. And if you just go see Adobe, it's just $15 to see it. I personally saw the cheaper of options. I did not need the highest fidelity to understand the story and the impact that was going on. But if the sound and visual is really important to you, then know that IMAX is what it was originally shot in. But if you are someone whose sound is a big deal, if you're kind of impacted, just know that the sound really comes in through certain sound bites and certain music to really, it really can push you. So it might be a little much for some. Finally, as far as the rating goes, there's not really much sexual scenes or anything of that nature. They barely kiss in the film. It's definitely more of a political intrigue, and the emotions are felt through expressions of the face and just dialogue. There's a couple scenes though that does imply that Paul and Channy just had sex and now they're having a conversation about stuff to come in the future. There's also another scene where one of the Bene Gesserit is seducing um, Fade Ratha, one of the Harkonnen guys, and it comes off very suggestive at first, but it's actually a trick, and she's actually putting him through a test. So anything that happens there, they cut to the next scene, and she just explains that what happened to the Reverend Mother. So nothing visually is done there. Violence, though, is a big part of the film. It's definitely about war and aggression, especially with the Harkonnens. They're a very violent culture. That's their way of solving problems. Their hierarchy is structured on the most violent is basically in charge of their culture, which is a downfall of their culture because they are losing resources. And you can see that when things start to come undone later, it's evident that their philosophy is failing them. Final thoughts. I think the film is artistically quite good. I think it's definitely going to be compared to Lord of the Rings and the epic scope. I also think that it's possible many students might see this film and feel like others did back in 1977 with Star Wars, just being a really impact film of their generation. So, those are my overall thoughts and things to look for just in general. However, I'm going to talk a little bit longer about part two of my analysis, and this is going to be a much more comprehensive one. So, if you're someone who didn't see the first part or you haven't read the book, and you're going into this film and you kind of want to know like what's really happening in this film, because there's a lot of information that was built into the books that goes into the film. I'm going to explain that definitely in full. So I will do that in part two.